Hi, my name is Claire Ellison. I'm 41, and if you had met me a decade ago, you'd never imagine I'd be sitting here today, sipping coffee on the terrace of my private penthouse, watching the sun set over the Pacific Ocean. I wasn't born into wealth. I wasn't born into favor. I was born into a family that praised my little brother for merely breathing while I had to bleed to earn a nod. I built my life from scratch. From waitressing tables through college to founding my own supply chain startup in Santa Monica, which, by the grace of God and years of exhaustion, exploded into one of the top logistics firms in California. But this story? This isn't about money or success. It's about family, and how mine looked me in the eye and told me, in my own home, that I didn't belong. It's about a beach mansion I bought to bring us together, only to be locked out like a stranger. It's about how I walked away quietly, then let the walls speak for me. Let the house itself remind them whose name was on the deed. Let the truth echo through every flickering light, every shiver down their spine. They wanted to haunt me? I made sure the house haunted them. So tell me, have you ever been pushed so far that silence was no longer strength, but strategy? If you've ever tasted betrayal from your own blood and swallowed it down just to keep peace, stick around. Because this is how I took back everything, without raising my voice, without breaking a single law, but with every ounce of my power. If this beginning pulled at something inside you, a scar, a memory, a quiet rage, share it, comment, save it, because what comes next will make you question everything about what loyalty means and what happens when the black sheep stops playing nice. People think betrayal begins with a grand explosion, a shouted insult, a slammed door, a knife in the back. But no, it starts in small, quiet moments, like being 12 and watching your brother open a new bicycle on Christmas morning, while you unwrap a sweater 2 sizes too big, like hearing your father say, "Your brother's got real potential," while you were already holding down 2 after-school jobs, like feeling invisible in a room where your entire family is laughing and realizing the joke is you. I grew up in a modest home in Charleston, South Carolina. My father, Richard Ellison, ran a small auto repair shop. My mother, Paula, worked part-time at a library. And my younger brother, Eric, the sun in their little solar system, did absolutely nothing except bask in their light. I was the responsible one, the one who never came home late, the one who cooked dinner when Mom had migraines, the one who kept her mouth shut. It didn't matter. No matter how many honor rolls I made, how many scholarships I won, it was always Eric who got their full attention. He'd crash Dad's truck, and they'd buy him another one. I got a 4.0 GPA, and they barely looked up from the TV. I was never bitter about it when I was younger. Just tired. I told myself it was normal. Some families are just like that, right? Some daughters are expected to be the grown-up before they even hit puberty. Some daughters are only noticed when something goes wrong. So I did what any forgotten girl does. I made myself smaller and quieter and sharper. I left home at 17 with a suitcase and a full ride to UC Berkeley. Didn't even look back when the front door closed behind me. They barely noticed I was gone. College was the first time I breathed, really breathed. I studied business, took every night shift I could get, didn't sleep, didn't party. While other girls were dating and dancing and dreaming, I was hustling, pitching, cold calling local suppliers for internships. And when I finally walked across that graduation stage, top of my class, guess how many seats my family filled? 0. Not one damn seat. I remember standing on that stage, scanning the crowd. All those beaming parents, mothers crying, fathers holding giant bouquets, families cheering like their child just won the Nobel Prize, and me, just me. alone in a sea of applause that wasn't meant for me. I told myself I didn't need them. I didn't need anyone. And maybe I believed that for a while. Until I made my first real dollar. Until I signed the lease on my first warehouse space. Until I stared at a blank office wall and thought, what's the point of all this if I don't have anyone to call? That's when it began. The second betrayal. The one I walked into willingly. I let them back in. I reached out. I bought my parents plane tickets to visit Los Angeles, put them up in a 5-star hotel, took them to dinner at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the entire city. And when I showed them my business, the trucks, the warehouses, the people calling me ma'am like I was somebody, I waited. Waited for the pride. Waited for a single word like, Claire, we're proud of you. But instead, my dad just nodded and said, that's a lot of stress for a girl. You sure you don't want to let your brother help out? Eric. Of course. Eric, who at that point had already tanked 2 landscaping businesses and 1 doomed crypto startup. Eric, who still lived with them, playing Xbox and dodging creditors. And me? The fool who kept smiling, cutting the steak I paid for, sipping the wine I poured, pretending I hadn't just been slapped with disappointment disguised as advice. I didn't argue, I just nodded and said, sure, Dad. Then I paid the bill, just like I always did. That was the beginning of a pattern I wouldn't break for years. Pay the bill, keep the peace, let them take from me in the name of family, time, money, emotional oxygen, while I swallowed the pain with polite silence. But all of that changed the day I signed the deed to the mansion and handed them the key. I'll tell you how that happened, and how everything I built began to unravel in my own hands. They say never give someone the knife they'll use to cut you, but I gave them a key, not just any key, the key, to a dream I spent 14 years building, to a house that wasn't just a home, but a symbol that I had made it, that I had outrun every memory of being the daughter they never noticed, the girl they never applauded, the woman they never believed in. The mansion stood tall on a cliffside in Laguna Beach, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific, a wraparound balcony, and a stone fireplace carved by hand. I'd walked through dozens of properties across Southern California, but the moment I stepped into that house, I knew. It wasn't just beautiful. It was mine. It was peace. It was permanence. It was proof that I wasn't just the girl who got good grades. I was the woman who made herself. That day I called my mom. I remember it vividly. The wind was brushing the sea just right, and the smell of salt and sunlight hung in the air like a promise. I stood on the upper deck, barefoot, phone pressed to my ear. Mom, I said, I bought a place. It's something else. She sounded distracted, probably watching game shows again. That's nice, Claire. You always did like the ocean. Is it small? I laughed. A dry, bitter little thing. No, it's not small. It's 4 bedrooms, 2 stories, and has its own private beach access. Silence. Then, 4 bedrooms. That's... wow. That's a lot for just you. There it was. That thorn. That implication. That something was off about a woman being successful and alone. I could hear the judgment, even if she thought it was wrapped in maternal concern. I bought it for the family too, I lied. I want you and Dad to feel like it's your getaway, you know? I even made sure the guest rooms have ocean views. And I'll send Eric a key too. You all should visit whenever. Even now, I don't know why I said it. Maybe it was that inner child still trying to earn affection. Maybe it was loneliness dressed up as generosity. Or maybe I wanted to believe I was finally included, that if I opened my door wide enough, they'd finally see me. My mother's voice softened. Claire, that's very thoughtful. Your brother's been stressed lately. He could use a break. I'll let him know." I didn't catch the warning in her tone then. Didn't catch the subtle shift in how she bypassed me and immediately filtered everything through him. I mailed them the key that same day. Overnighted it. Gold trim. Branded leather case. A printed welcome note with the words, "This house belongs to all of us now." A lie I would choke on months later. The first time they visited, it was innocent enough. A week in spring. Mom marveled at the marble countertops. Dad took naps by the fire. Eric snapped selfies on the deck like he owned the place. I overlooked it all. Even when Eric invited 2 of his friends to crash for the weekend without asking. Even when I found beer bottles under the chaise lounge, scuff marks on the tile, and one of the guest beds stained with sand and God knows what. I told myself, it's okay. It's just family. When they left, I paid for a deep cleaning crew, replaced the rug, repaired the cracked tile by the pool. Didn't say a word. Not even when Eric texted a week later. That place was insane. You really lucked out. Lucked out. As if it wasn't decades of sacrifice. As if I hadn't spent years skipping meals to meet payroll. Living in a studio apartment while I paid off warehouse leases. Sleeping 4 hours a night just to outbid my competitors by sunrise. Luck? Luck was not what bought that house. But still, I stayed quiet. I kept sending care packages to my parents. I kept wiring Eric money when he said he was between jobs again. I even let them use the house for Thanksgiving when I couldn't make it due to a supply chain crisis in Asia. And when Christmas came, I found a framed photo of Eric and his kids at the mansion, posted on my mom's Facebook with the caption, "So proud of our son. Look at the home he's brought the family to." I stared at the screen, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my molars might crack. Not a single mention of me, not a tag, not a thanks. Eric didn't correct her. Of course not. Why would he? He was already used to standing on stages he didn't build, smiling under lights he didn't install. And I was used to being the scaffolding no one thanked before they tore it down. But the key had already been given. And once you give them the key, to the house, to your heart, to your silence, you can't be surprised when they move in and change the locks. Because that's exactly what they did. And I didn't even know. Until the day I returned. And found the house full of voices that weren't mine, laughter that didn't belong to me, and a family that looked me in the eye and told me to leave. But I'll save that moment for another chapter, because before that betrayal came to a head, there was one final mistake I made, one final line I let them cross, and it happened the day I brought someone else into the picture, someone who would change everything, my heart, my hope, my reason to finally fight back. His name was Marcus Hale. He wasn't flashy, didn't come from money, didn't have an Ivy League degree or a portfolio of assets or some perfectly tailored suit that screamed success. He was a high school history teacher from Ventura, soft-spoken, brilliant, the kind of man who smelled like old books and wind after rain. I met him at a charity benefit I almost skipped, tired from work, bored by the usual networking sharks. He stood near the coffee table, awkwardly trying to balance his drink and his plate of finger food without spilling either. I liked that he looked out of place, like someone who didn't belong there either. That night, we talked about everything but business. He didn't ask me what I did for a living until 2 weeks later. And when I told him, he didn't flinch, didn't joke that I was intimidating, didn't make it a competition. Didn't suggest Eric could help out. He just looked at me with quiet awe and said, "Claire, you built all that yourself?" "Yes," I said. "I did." He smiled and touched my hand gently. "You must be exhausted and proud." It was the first time in my life someone had said those 2 words to me in the same breath. Exhausted, proud. That night when I got home, I cried in the shower, not from pain, but from the strange ache of being seen, really seen, for the first time in years. Marcus wasn't the kind of man my parents would pick for me. He didn't have ambition in the way they understood it. He didn't want to build an empire. He just wanted a home. He wanted mornings filled with coffee and bare feet on hardwood floors, evenings spent reading, arms wrapped around each other, the sea humming in the background. He wanted a life with me, so I showed him the mansion. I remember the look on his face when we pulled into the driveway. He stepped out of the car, turned in a full circle, taking it all in. The garden, the stone archway, the sky bleeding orange behind the roofline. Then he looked at me like I was made of magic. "Claire, it's beautiful, but..." He hesitated. "Are you happy here?" I blinked. Happy? It wasn't a question I was used to hearing. The house was a trophy, a monument, proof. But was it happiness? I didn't answer, just took his hand and led him inside. That weekend was the first time someone slept beside me in that house, and somehow, for the first time, it felt like a home. We cooked pasta barefoot in the giant kitchen, read poetry on the deck until the stars came out, fell asleep on the couch with wine still in our glasses and music still playing low. I thought, maybe this is what the house was meant for, not to prove something, but to build something. And then they came back. My parents, Eric, his girlfriend, his kids, uninvited. I woke up one morning to the sound of car doors slamming. Marcus and I were still in pajamas, brushing teeth, laughing about some silly dream he'd had. Then I looked out the window and saw them dragging in coolers, beach towels, suitcases, like they lived there, like they'd never left. I didn't panic, not yet. I just stepped outside, barefoot on the marble, toothbrush still in hand. My mother turned, her face lighting up like she was the one doing me a favor. "Oh, honey, we figured we'd come early. Long weekend and all. I told Eric you wouldn't mind." Didn't even ask, didn't even knock. Eric waved from the driveway like he was greeting the neighbor. His girlfriend blew me a kiss. Marcus came to the door behind me, freezing when he saw the chaos. I introduced him politely. My parents gave him the kind of smile people give a substitute teacher they don't plan to respect. "And Eric?" He barely glanced at Marcus before saying, "Nice. You brought a boyfriend. Thought you were married to the house." Marcus laughed lightly, tried to shake it off. But I felt it, that little crack in the earth. And when I showed them to the guest rooms, my mother had the nerve to say, "We'll take the upstairs suite this time, sweetheart. Your brother's girlfriend has back pain, and that room's closest to the balcony." My room, the one with the view, the one I'd designed to be my sanctuary. I was too stunned to respond. And Marcus? He saw it all. The way they dismissed me, the way they rearranged the house like it was theirs, the way they barely acknowledged him. That night, we slept on the pull-out sofa. I told him it was fine, it was just one weekend. But he didn't say a word, just held me a little tighter. The next morning, he made breakfast, quietly, carefully. And while I sipped my coffee in silence, watching Eric's kids spill orange juice on the rug, my mother turned to Marcus and asked, loud enough for the whole kitchen to hear, "So what do you do exactly?" He told her gently, "I teach, high school." She blinked, smiled politely. "Oh, that's sweet, sweet," as if it were a hobby, as if I were dating a puppy. Later, when I followed her to the laundry room to grab towels, she pulled me aside, voice low, tone concerned. "Claire, darling, are you sure about him? I mean, look at all you've built. You need someone who matches you, not someone who just wants to play house." I should have screamed, should have thrown her out right then, but I just nodded and folded the towels. Later that evening, Marcus sat beside me on the edge of the pool. The house glowed behind us. My family buzzed inside, laughing, drinking, playing music like it was their vacation rental. He turned to me and asked gently, "Do they always treat you like this?" I nodded. He sighed. "I don't want to come between you and your family, Claire, but they don't treat you like family." I didn't answer, because I knew. He was right. They didn't love me for me. They loved me for what I gave them, and once they had what they wanted, they forgot who bought the house, who held the key, but they were about to remember. Because the next time I returned to the mansion, they wouldn't let me in. And that was the final betrayal. You ready to hear how it happened? I should have seen it coming. After everything, the unspoken slights, the disregard, the entitlement, I should have known they would cross that final line. But betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It crept in slowly, like fog over the cliffside. A chill in the air I dismissed as coastal wind, until the door slammed in my face, and I realized I was never inside to begin with. It was late June. I'd just wrapped a 3-month international expansion deal for my company. Seoul, Berlin, Sao Paulo, sleepless nights, conference calls at 3 a.m. My body was drained, but my spirit was on fire. I was proud, worn, and aching for peace. And in my mind, peace meant the beach house, me, Marcus, and a long weekend of silence, waves, and wine. We packed our bags, left L.A. at sunrise, humming road trip songs and dreaming of the ocean. I didn't tell anyone we were coming. I didn't think I needed to. It was my house. I built it, paid for every inch, designed every tile, every doorknob, every wall color. And I still remember the exact moment the mansion came into view, the Pacific shimmering like liquid gold behind it, the way the palms swayed, the way the sun hit the driveway just right. I smiled, exhaling for the first time in weeks. Marcus reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're home," he said softly. Except I wasn't, because someone had changed the code on the front gate. I blinked, assumed it was a mistake, punched in the code again. No response. I tried the backup, then the emergency override. Still nothing. Marcus stepped out of the car, tried the pedestrian side entrance, locked. That's when I noticed the black SUV parked out front. Eric's. And the voices, coming from inside my house, laughing, music, glasses clinking. I called my mother. She didn't answer. I called Eric, straight to voicemail. Finally, I rang the caretaker. He answered, flustered. "Oh, Ms. Ellison, I wasn't expecting. I thought you weren't due until next. I'm standing outside my house," I said, voice sharp. "The gate code's changed. Why?" A long pause, then sheepishly. "Your brother told me you'd given them permission to stay indefinitely. He said he'd handle access. He, told me not to bother you." I hung up. My pulse was a slow, hot thunder beneath my skin. Marcus stood beside me, eyes searching mine. "Claire?" I didn't answer, just drove us to the nearest motel. It was a 2-star place off the highway. Peeling paint, thin walls, a humming vending machine that flickered like it might explode. We slept in silence that night, under fluorescent lights and a blanket that smelled like bleach. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't throw things or call anyone or make a scene. I just stared at the ceiling, and something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage. It was colder than that, clearer, sharper. I remembered something Marcus had said to me once, in that calm, gentle voice of his. You don't always have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes you win by refusing to burn. But this time, I would burn. Not recklessly, not cruelly, but precisely, surgically, with grace and silence and planning so meticulous it would leave no ash, only memory. The next morning, I drove us back to the city without a word. Marcus didn't ask questions. He just held my hand the entire way. Back in LA, I started collecting information. Not arguments, not confrontation, just facts. I hired a private security team to audit the smart system in the mansion. They confirmed what I already knew. The access logs had been altered remotely, traced back to Eric's phone. He'd taken administrative control of the house's security network, a privilege I'd foolishly granted him during one of those generous, naive phases. My tech lead showed me how easily he'd done it. Just a click, just a setting, just a moment of arrogance. I watched the logs, watched the camera feeds, my parents throwing parties in the living room, Eric sipping cocktails in the infinity pool with strangers, my mother wearing a robe I'd left in the upstairs closet, the one Marcus said made me look like I owned the night, my father laughing as if his daughter hadn't been locked out of her own dream. And suddenly, everything clicked. This wasn't just disrespect, it was occupation. They had taken the house, rewritten the story, recast themselves as the rightful characters while I stood outside, nameless and forgotten. And it wasn't the house that hurt me most. It was the memory of my 12-year-old self, watching my brother open that bicycle on Christmas. That same ache, that same silence, that same knowing. They've chosen him again. But this time, I wasn't going to disappear. I wasn't going to swallow it. I was going to answer, but not with shouting, not with keys or lawyers or family meetings that ended in guilt trips and tears. No, I was going to answer the way they never saw coming, not by taking back the house, but by letting the house itself speak, because I had one more card to play. A silent one, a powerful one, and once it was played, they would never forget whose name built that mansion, whose silence carved the walls, whose love had been mistaken for weakness, and who was about to remind them that love, when betrayed, becomes something else entirely, something colder, something final. I would take everything back, not with force, but with precision, with performance, with a haunting they would never laugh off. And when the lights began to flicker, when the walls began to whisper, when the very house rose up against them, they'd remember. They'd finally remember that Claire Ellison was never the outsider. She was the storm they invited in, and soon it would arrive. They thought they'd taken it from me, the keys, the gate, the rooms I designed with my bare hands, the silence I gave them as a gift. But silence is never empty. It listens, it learns, it sharpens itself in the dark. And when the time is right, it speaks. That summer, while they laughed in my chairs, slept in my linens, drank wine under my skylights, I was building something far more powerful than a tantrum or a phone call. I was building witnesses, invisible ones, all throughout the house. I hired a private security firm from San Jose, not the kind you find in Yelp listings. No, this team specialized in discreet, smart home takeovers, silent automation, psychological environmental manipulation, subtle chaos. A woman named Riley met me in a warehouse loft in Culver City, wearing combat boots and a ponytail high enough to be threatening. "I want control back," I told her, sliding over a flash drive, without ever stepping inside. She didn't flinch. "You want them gone?" I nodded. She smiled. "Then we let the house do the talking." It took 5 days. 5 days of encrypted system overrides, hidden sensors, light recalibration, motion-activated sound effects, micro-projections, voice tracks masked with AI filters, and one chilling script. Unauthorized presence detected. Vacate the premises. You do not belong here. We hid the speakers inside the floor molding, the projectors within the ceiling beams. The control system was linked directly to my phone with a trigger button that pulsed red like a heartbeat. All I had to do was wait, and they gave me the perfect moment. My mother, the self-appointed lady of the manor, had decided to host a dinner for new business contacts, some friend of Eric's boss, a couple of realtors, and a man she proudly described as a potential investor. The arrogance made me laugh. She was hosting investors. In my house, on my rug, under my lights, like she had a right to entertain strangers in a story she never authored. The footage from the dining room cam came in crisp, 4K, wide angle, no sound distortion. I sat cross-legged in my penthouse in LA, glass of red wine in hand, Marcus beside me, laptop open. We watched them toast with glasses from my bar, listened to my mother brag about how much the family had grown, watched Eric pass off the open floor plan as his design idea, and that's when Marcus looked at me. "Now?" he asked quietly. I looked down at the screen, at the people inside the house I built, smug, seated, full of themselves. I touched the red trigger button on my phone. Once. It began with the lights. Flicker, flicker, then a buzz. Like power skipping across a frayed wire. They paused mid-sentence, looked up, laughed nervously. "Old wiring," someone joked. Then the hallway lights blinked off completely. Dark, then on, then off again. One guest stood. "That's odd." Another tried the switch on the wall. Nothing. And then came the sound. At first it was subtle, like distant footsteps in a corridor, too faint to locate, too soft to be certain. Then a breath. Not real. Synthetic. Hollow. As if the house itself was inhaling. The thermostat plummeted. A 15-degree drop in under a minute. The windows fogged. The guests shivered. And that's when the voice came. Low. Female. Mechanical, but sentient. From every wall, every ceiling corner, every vent. Unauthorized presence detected. Vacate the premises. You do not belong here. My mother stood, pale. Her wine glass hit the floor and shattered. Eric laughed, nervously. "Claire must be messing with the system. She's being dramatic." But the house didn't stop. "This property is monitored. Trespassing will be documented. You have 90 seconds to leave." One of the guests, a woman in a red dress, grabbed her purse and bolted. Eric ran to the hallway panel, pressed the touchscreen. It blinked red. "Admin override required," it read. "Access denied." He cursed. Ran to the fuse box. But that had already been rigged. Riley's team had sealed it electronically. He was locked in my house, with no control. I watched it all on screen, sipping my wine in silence. One by one, the guests scattered, shouting, slamming doors, yanking on the front gate that no longer responded to their commands. Then came the projections. Shadows, soft, flickering, human-shaped, glided across the far wall like ghosts slipping between realities. Eric screamed. Not a word, a primal sound. The kind of sound a man makes when he realizes he's not the alpha in the room anymore. And my mother? She stood frozen, as if she knew. This wasn't just tech. This was message. This was me. Her daughter. The one she'd ignored. The one she let sleep on the couch while Eric took the master suite. The one who handed her keys with love. And now took them back with silence. I watched her whisper something to herself as she backed toward the door. And in that moment, that precise moment, I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. She'd never seen me as hers, only as useful. And now that I was no longer useful, she was afraid. Not of the house, not of ghosts, but of me, the one who remembered every dismissal and built something she could never destroy. The footage ended with them stumbling into the driveway. Keys dropped, shoes forgotten, voices trembling. The house lights faded to black, and the voice gave one final whisper, "Goodbye." I shut the laptop, took a breath, and for the first time in years, I felt whole. But the story wasn't over, because Eric wasn't going to take this humiliation quietly. And the next day, he did something I never expected. He called me. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:12 a.m. I knew it would. Eric doesn't suffer in silence. Never has. He doesn't just fall. He thrashes, flails, and makes sure someone else lands beneath him. The name flashed across my screen. Eric, do not answer. I let it ring. Then again and again. 6 calls in 20 minutes. Then a text. Claire, what the hell did you do? Then, that house is unlivable. My guests are traumatized. Mom's blood pressure spiked. You're sick. And finally, you think you're smart? This isn't over. I stared at the screen, calm as a glacier. He still didn't get it. Still thought this was a prank. Still thought I was playing the same family games we'd always played. Bruised egos, loud voices, slammed doors. He didn't realize I'd already left the game. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the footage, all of it out, to my lawyer, Brenda Fields. She'd been on retainer for years, handled all my real estate contracts, corporate filings, and NDAs. But this was personal. I sent her a simple message. I want the locks changed, legally, permanently. I want a cease and desist issued to every member of my family, and I want sole access reinstated by the end of the week. They are trespassers, full compliance, no exceptions. 10 minutes later, she replied, "Understood. Consider it done." While she worked, Marcus and I disappeared for a while. Took a drive up the coast. Found a little cabin near Big Sur. No cameras, no cell signal, just trees, wind, and the steady pull of waves below the cliffs. We spent 3 days in stillness. No mentions of the house, no talk of Eric, no reminders of what I'd given or what had been taken. Just us, and the sound of what peace feels like when it's earned. On the 4th day, my phone pinged the moment we hit signal. A voicemail from Brenda. "Claire, just a heads up. Your brother filed a police report." I blinked. Played the message twice. He'd filed a report? Of what? Being scared by his sister's house? That he had no legal right to enter? I called Brenda immediately. "He's accusing you of harassment," she said. "Claims emotional distress. Says the house was rigged to psychologically terrorize his guests." I let out a bitter laugh. "That's creative." "It won't hold," she assured. "You've got proof of ownership, proof of prior access violations, and more importantly, you never physically entered the property. Everything was remote, all automated. You have every legal right to do what you did." Still, something in me shifted. Eric wasn't embarrassed. He was enraged. And dangerous people aren't always loud. They're persistent, especially when they've lived their entire life being rescued from their own consequences. I asked Brenda to file a restraining order, temporary at first, then permanent. Within 48 hours, it was approved. Eric Ellison was legally barred from entering or approaching the Laguna Beach property or contacting me, Marcus, or anyone in my household. I sent a single message to the family group chat, which I hadn't used in over a year. "The house is no longer a shared space. All prior privileges are revoked. I wish you well. Please respect this boundary. This is final." My mother replied, not with apology, not with remorse, but with guilt. "Claire, we were just trying to be close. I don't know why you're doing this. Your brother loves you. You're tearing us apart." The usual script, but I didn't reply, because I was done explaining myself to people who never listened the first 100 times. The day the new locks were installed, I went back, alone. Marcus offered to come, but I told him I needed to do this myself. I parked in the driveway, my driveway, and for the first time in months, the gate opened at my command. The house was quiet. The scent of sea salt and lavender oil still lingered in the air. I walked through each room, touching surfaces like they were old friends. The books were still in place, the chairs where I left them. Even the robe in the master closet, my robe, still hung where it belonged. But the energy had changed. It didn't feel stolen anymore. It felt reclaimed. I stood in the kitchen and watched the waves crash beyond the glass wall. Then I whispered aloud, just once, "I'm home." That evening, I made dinner for one. A soft jazz record played in the background, and as I set the table, poured a single glass of wine, and took a bite of the salmon I'd seared to perfection, I smiled. Because I wasn't just eating in peace, I was dining in justice. They had tried to erase me from something I'd built, but now the house knew my name. The walls had remembered, and no matter what Eric tried next, I was ready. Because now the world would see what he was really made of. Not the golden boy, not the victim, but the fraud. And the next event would expose him in front of everyone he'd ever tried to impress. I didn't plan for the gala to become a reckoning. At first, it was just a formal affair, a charity fundraiser hosted by the Southern California Logistics Alliance, a place for industry leaders to show off, drink overpriced cocktails, and smile for the camera. I'd been invited months ago, long before the family drama boiled over. I nearly declined, but something inside whispered, "Go." It wasn't just about networking. It was about being seen, not for revenge, for truth. And as it turned out, the truth doesn't need a microphone to be heard. All it needs is a stage. Marcus came with me, of course. He wore a navy blue suit I helped pick out. I wore black satin, sleek, minimalist, with a silver pendant around my neck, a gift from the first year my company turned profit. We arrived at the venue, a high-rise ballroom in downtown LA with crystal chandeliers and walls of glass overlooking the skyline. The place buzzed with money and ambition. Tables filled with CEOs, politicians, board members. Some nodded at me. Some stared too long. I was used to both. We took our seats near the front, just behind the keynote table. I was set to receive the Entrepreneurial Impact Award, a recognition of my company's expansion and philanthropic efforts that helped rebuild 4 shipping routes along the coast. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. But then I saw him, Eric, across the room, smiling, wearing a tux too expensive for someone who hadn't held a stable job in 4 years. He wasn't a guest. He was on stage, on the committee board. I froze. Marcus leaned in. "You okay?" "He's here," I whispered. Marcus followed my gaze, his jaw tightening. Eric stood near a display banner that read, "Coastal Ventures and Partners, a sponsor of innovation in motion." Of course he found some investor to leech off of, some new circle to charm. I wouldn't be surprised if he used my house in Laguna as a bragging point. Probably claimed it was family-owned real estate. He hadn't seen me yet, but he would. Halfway through the evening, after a round of speeches and toasts, the MC took the stage. And now, it's time to honor an individual whose innovation and resilience have redefined modern logistics on the West Coast. Applause. Her firm has created over 200 jobs, expanded internationally, and remained a beacon of ethical leadership. More applause. And her latest initiative, a coastal housing project for displaced dock workers, proves that business and compassion do not have to be opposites. And then, "Please welcome Claire Ellison." I stood, and just like that, every head in the ballroom turned, including his. Eric's smile faltered. You could almost hear it, the click in his brain. He hadn't known. He hadn't realized this award was for me. I walked past his table in silence, didn't look at him, didn't need to. The silence did more damage than a slap ever could. I took the stage, accepted the crystal plaque, and leaned into the mic. "Thank you," I said softly. "This means more than I can explain. I spent years building something no one believed I could, and for a long time I stayed quiet. I let others speak over me, sometimes even take credit, but tonight I'm reclaiming that story." A beat of quiet. Then I added, "And if there's anyone in this room who thinks they can rewrite someone else's work and wear it like it's theirs, let this be a reminder. The truth always outlasts the lie." Scattered applause, then a wave of thunder. I stepped off the stage, walked back to my table, and only then did I meet Eric's eyes. His face was pale. His date whispered something to him. He shook his head. I didn't say a word. But he knew. Oh, he knew. The cracks had begun, and they were widening fast. Later that night, I learned from a colleague that Eric had been pitching a fake logistics startup to potential donors. He'd name-dropped me, claimed I mentored him, claimed we co-owned the house in Laguna, even presented a business card that listed him as co-founder, Ellison Freight West. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my wine. The next morning, I sent a cease and desist to every one of his listed contacts, including the man who sponsored his table at the gala. I included footage of his eviction, the digital security logs, legal proof of his restraining order. I said nothing publicly, but his name, it stopped showing up in investor conversations after that week. His LinkedIn vanished. The website for Ellison Freight West redirected to a blank page, and just like that, he faded, not with a bang, but with a silence of his own. Only difference? Mine was power. His was erasure. And while he tried to salvage his name from the ashes, I stood taller than ever. Because when you stop giving them the stage, they have nowhere left to perform. The strange thing about a storm is what comes after, not the wreckage, not the headlines, but the silence, the eerie, breathless calm when the world realizes something's gone and isn't coming back. That was my family after the gala. Gone. Not physically, but their illusion, their claim, their smug, inherited confidence, wrecked. I didn't have to lift a finger anymore. The world had seen the truth. My story wasn't just mine now. It belonged to every table in that ballroom, to every guest who watched Eric's face crumble, to every handshake he'd ever manipulated. The fallout came slowly and deliciously. It started with a message from a woman I didn't know, someone from Eric's old investment group. "Ms. Ellison, I had no idea what your brother was doing behind your back. I deeply regret ever being part of his proposal. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to make it right." Then came a text from an old classmate. "I always thought you were the quiet one. Turns out you were the hurricane the whole time." And finally, the message I didn't expect, from my mother. "Claire, your father wants to talk to you. He's struggling." It came at 10:42 p.m., 2 nights after the gala. I stared at it for a full minute before locking my phone and placing it face down on the coffee table. Struggling? He'd let me struggle my entire life. Let me stand alone on graduation stages. Let me send him checks when Eric blew his rent money in Vegas. Let me hold the weight of this family while they clapped for someone else. Now he was struggling? And suddenly I mattered? Marcus saw the look on my face that night, didn't ask, just pulled me close and rested his chin on my shoulder. "You don't owe them anything," he whispered. He was right, but it didn't stop the ache, because deep down, every daughter wants her father to see her, not as useful, not as strong, but as beloved. I didn't reply. But I didn't block her either. Let them sit in the silence for once. Let them taste the absence I'd known since childhood. That weekend, I drove to Laguna, alone. The house was still, untouched. The smart system reinstalled, security restored. No signs of life except for the lemon tree blooming again in the back patio. I walked through the hallways barefoot, fingers trailing across cool surfaces. The fireplace still held the faint scent of the last log I'd burned. The couch still had the same sunken seat where Marcus always sat. I made tea, sat on the balcony, and listened. No laughter, no slamming doors, no Eric shouting into his phone, no guests clinking glasses over wine they hadn't bought. Just wind, just sea, just me. It didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in years. They're gone, but I'm still here. I outlasted them. Not because I screamed louder, but because I stood when they expected me to kneel. The house remembers me now, and more importantly, I remember myself. They don't get to write the ending. I do. I slept in the master suite with the windows open, and when the morning sun poured through the curtains, it felt like peace, real peace, not bought, not borrowed, not shared, but earned. Still, peace never lasts untouched, because the past has a way of scratching at locked doors, and it came back to scratch again just 1 week later, when my mother showed up at the gate unannounced. She came just after sunrise. I was standing in the kitchen, barefoot in a robe, steam curling from my mug of coffee. The morning was still wrapped in that early hush, waves murmuring against the shore, birds cutting the silence with delicate sound. Then the gate chimed. Not a security alert, not a triggered sensor, a visitor, a request. I moved to the wall panel, swiped across the camera feed, and there she was, my mother, Paula Ellison, standing stiff at the gate, arms crossed, wearing a faded cardigan over a floral blouse. Her hair was pulled back too tight, the way she always wore it when she was trying to act like everything was fine. But her eyes, they were glass, wider than I remembered, like someone who wasn't sure what they'd come for, or whether they'd be let in. I stared at the screen for a full minute before pressing the intercom. My voice was colder than I meant it to be. "What do you want, Mom?" She blinked at the sound, surprised, maybe even wounded. Then she leaned toward the speaker. I just want to talk, Claire. That name, Claire. Not sweetheart, not baby, not honey, just Claire. The formality of it stung, but it also confirmed what I already knew. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here to manage a fire. And I was the match that had already burned the field. "I don't think we have anything to talk about," I replied calmly. She looked down, then back up. "I just need 5 minutes." I hesitated. 5 minutes. That was all she ever gave me growing up, wasn't it? 5 minutes of attention between Eric's messes. 5 minutes of applause when she thought I could be useful. 5 minutes of motherhood when it made her look good in front of others. But never presence, never full love, just minutes. Still, I opened the gate, not because she deserved it, but because I did. I deserved to look this woman in the eye and show her that I no longer bowed, no longer waited for her approval like crumbs under a table. She stepped through the entry path slowly, eyes darting over the landscaping, the windows, the glass railing, as if seeing the house for the first time, as it truly was, mine, owned, commanded. She stopped just outside the front door, unsure whether to reach for the handle. I opened it for her and didn't step aside. She stood there blinking. "Can I come in?" "You already did," I said flatly. "Plenty of times, without asking." Her mouth tightened, then relaxed. She nodded once, almost like a reflex. I let her in. She moved slowly, her gaze sweeping the hallway, the art on the walls, the neat stack of books on the table. "This place is," she whispered. "Exactly how I left it," I finished for her. She turned to face me. There were more lines around her eyes than I remembered. Her voice was quieter than it used to be, like someone trying not to crack in public. "I know we've hurt you," she began. I said nothing. She continued. "I know what we did, what I did, was wrong." Still, I remained silent, because I wanted to hear the rest. I needed to know what kind of person she would be when pressed into truth. I let Eric take too much. I protected him when I should have held him accountable. I let your father convince me that keeping the peace meant choosing sides, and somehow, I always chose the wrong one. I blinked. That wasn't what I expected. I told myself you didn't need anything, that you were strong, that you'd be fine. But the truth is, I ignored the daughter who needed me most. My throat tightened. I didn't want it to, but it did. She looked at the marble floor, then back at me. I wasn't kind to Marcus. I know that. I judged him before I even shook his hand. And when you let us stay here, when you opened this home to us, I let it become a playground for Eric's delusion. Finally, she said it. Eric's delusion. Not mine, not Marcus's, not some misunderstanding. I folded my arms across my chest. I didn't need this house to feel like I belonged, Mom. I needed you to make me feel like I belonged. And you never did. You watched me give and give until I had nothing left. Then you watched them take even that. Tears filled her eyes. I know. The silence stretched between us, long and aching. Then she said the one thing I truly didn't expect. I miss you. I looked at her, my jaw tense. You miss the daughter who sent money when your lights were about to be shut off. You miss the woman who paid the property taxes on a house she didn't live in so you and Dad wouldn't lose it. You miss the stability, not me. She stepped forward. No, I miss the daughter I never truly knew. The one I ignored because it was easier to focus on the child who always needed saving. The tears came then, real ones. They weren't dramatic. They were quiet. She didn't wipe them away, just let them fall, her voice raw. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to say it. I needed to say it to your face, not in a text, not in some voicemail. I needed you to hear me. The ocean roared softly behind the walls. I stared at her. This woman who birthed me, who raised me, who left me out in the cold while warming her arms around the wrong child. And I said evenly, I don't hate you, Mom. She inhaled sharply. But I don't trust you either. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And I'm not going to hug you and say this fixes things, because it doesn't. But I hear you. That was all I had to give. She nodded, wiping under one eye. I'll go now, she said quietly. She turned, but just before she stepped out, she paused and looked back. Claire, this house. It's never felt warmer than it does right now, not even when we were all inside. I didn't respond. She left, and this time I didn't cry. I didn't shatter, because I wasn't a broken daughter hoping for scraps of love anymore. I was a woman with a name that meant something, and silence was no longer my curse. It was my power. The day I let my mother walk away without a promise to fix everything was the day I truly stepped into my own life. Because healing doesn't always come with hugs and long overdue I love yous. Sometimes healing is a closed door and the strength not to reopen it for the same pain to walk in again. In the weeks that followed, there was no grand reunion, no group apology, no family dinner where everything magically made sense. Eric never reached out again. Not after the cease and desist letters multiplied. Not after his little startup collapsed beneath the weight of its own lies. Rumor had it he moved upstate. Rumor also had it he was trying to get a job at a shipping yard, the kind my company manages. I didn't stop him, but I didn't make it easy either. Let the world show him what it's like to carry something heavy and have no one show up to help. As for my father, he sent a single handwritten letter. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked inside a plain white envelope. No return address, just his familiar looping script across the front. Inside were 6 short lines. "Claire, I should have protected you better. I'm sorry I didn't. You've become everything I wasn't brave enough to be. If we never speak again, just know. You made it further than any of us ever dreamed." I folded the letter carefully, tucked it between the pages of my journal, and said nothing. Because I wasn't writing their redemption anymore. I was finally writing mine. One morning, I stood on the balcony of the beach house, sun washing my skin gold, coffee warm in my hand, robe fluttering like I belonged to the air itself, and I realized I wasn't waiting for them to get better anymore. I was getting better without them. That truth? It was like wind finally filling a sail that had been stuck for years, and with it came something even more unexpected. Peace. Not performative peace, the kind I used to pretend I had when I wired them money, smiled through their slights, or watched them take credit for what I'd built. No, this was different. It was soft. It was quiet. It didn't ask for applause. It came when Marcus moved in, not as a guest, but as a partner. We never made a grand announcement. No Instagram photos, no champagne bottle popping on a balcony. He simply brought his toothbrush one day and never took it back. He taught me how to sleep without checking emails, taught me how to laugh while making mistakes, like when I burned the eggs and he ate them anyway, taught me how to exist without proving. And in return, I gave him a woman who no longer needed to win every room, just the ones that mattered. I remember the day he proposed. It wasn't over candlelight or violin music. It was on the sand. We'd gone for a late walk, our feet buried in the cool grit of the Pacific shoreline. He paused, looked at me and said, "I want to build a home with you. Not a house, a home. One that no one else gets to invade." Then he pulled out a simple silver band. I didn't cry. I just whispered, "Yes." And we sat down in the sand, arms wrapped around each other, letting the ocean crash in approval. We didn't have a wedding right away. We eloped. Just us, a courthouse, and the wind. I didn't invite my parents. Not out of anger, but because I'd stopped needing them to witness my joy. I'd stopped needing permission to celebrate. A year later, I turned the beach house into something new. Not just a home, a refuge, a place for women like me, women who'd been overlooked, undervalued, overworked, entrepreneurs, artists, survivors, thinkers. I launched a retreat program, the Sanctuary Table, 1 week, 8 women, no noise, no demands, just healing, firelight, and truth. We journaled under the stars. We cried on balconies. We shared meals in the kitchen I once stood in alone, waiting for my family to show up for me. Now, I showed up for others, and they showed up for me. One night, during a group circle on the deck, one of the women asked me, "When did you finally stop needing them to say sorry?" I smiled, took a long sip of tea, and said, "The day I realized I didn't need to stay broken just because they never said they were sorry." Gasps, nods, silent tears. They got it. Because they were me, all of them, pieces of me I once hid under the rug of survival. And now we sat in the open air, wounds exposed, healing without apology. That was the greatest revenge of all. Not their downfall, but my quiet rising. Because they may have taken advantage. They may have walked into my house like it was theirs. They may have told their version of the story for years. But in the end, I took the pen back. I told the truth. And I built a life so full, so grounded, so wildly mine, that they couldn't touch it even if they tried, even if they begged, even if they finally saw me. Because by the time they did, I had already closed that door and opened 1,000 others, doors they would never walk through, doors I never waited for them to knock on again. Peace didn't arrive with a trumpet. It didn't knock on my door with a bouquet of closure or a grand apology from those who once called me selfish, cold, or too ambitious to ever be loved properly. No. Peace crept in like a soft tide at dawn, almost unnoticed. It took me months to realize it had even arrived. It began with the absence of tension, the way my chest no longer tightened when my phone buzzed, the way I no longer braced myself before checking voicemails. No more urgent messages from Eric asking for help covering rent. No texts from my mother saying, "You've changed," every time I said no. No guilt blooming behind every act of self-care. It wasn't loud. It was stillness, the kind that sits deep in your bones when you're no longer looking over your shoulder for betrayal wrapped in a smile. Marcus and I lived gently, not perfectly, but gently. We made mistakes. We forgot to take the trash out. We fought sometimes over silly things like dish placement or how fast he drove on winding roads. But our love? It wasn't built on performance or survival. It was choice. Every day, he chose me, and I chose him. We spent evenings on the back deck, wrapped in sweaters and stories. He told me about the students that challenged him, the boy who finally opened up about his father, the girl who turned in a paper that made him cry. I told him about the sanctuary table, about the woman who had built her candle business from her grief, about the mother who finally left the man who silenced her, about the artist who sold her first painting and mailed me a copy of it to hang in the upstairs hallway. Each story was a stone we placed in the new life we were building. And over time, the mansion that had once been a battleground, it became sacred ground, no longer haunted by memory, but inhabited by presence. My own. There was one moment, a quiet one, that told me I had finally crossed over. It was a Sunday morning. Fog clung to the windows. Rain tapped softly on the roof. I had just finished making breakfast, banana pancakes, Marcus's favorite, when I walked past the hallway mirror and stopped. I looked at myself, no makeup, hair messy, t-shirt too big, bare feet, and I smiled, not because I looked flawless, but because I looked like me. And for the first time in decades, I didn't flinch at the reflection, didn't analyze, didn't criticize, didn't question whether I was enough. I just smiled and whispered, "Hey, you." It sounds silly. Maybe it was, but to greet yourself with gentleness, after years of being measured, manipulated, misunderstood, that's not vanity, that's victory. A month later, Marcus surprised me, not with flowers, not with a trip, but with something far more intimate, a library. He'd turned the upstairs guest room, the one my parents used to claim as theirs, into a reading space, soft lighting, wooden shelves, a window bench, a globe in the corner, framed quotes on the wall, including my favorite. She remembered who she was, and the game changed. I cried the moment I walked in. Not loud sobs, just tears sliding down silently, the way they do when someone loves you in a language you forgot you spoke. I turned to him, speechless. He pulled me into his arms and said, "This is your space now, every inch. No one else gets to rewrite it." I kissed him hard, because that's what love should feel like. Not rescue, but reverence. And in that room, something else bloomed. A whisper I had buried. An idea I had locked away when I was too busy surviving to dream. A book. My story. Not just about the house. Not just about Eric or my parents or the betrayal that echoed through marble floors, but about becoming. About what it means to outlive the stories others write about you and tell your own. I wrote at night, while the waves hummed, while the fireplace glowed, while Marcus read beside me and the world forgot to demand anything from me for once. And when the manuscript was done, I held it in my hands like it was a baby made of ash and light. I titled it, "The House That Remembered My Name," not for vengeance, but for truth. I didn't send it to a major publisher. I self-published, quietly, an offering, for the women who'd been erased in their own stories. And within months, the letters began to arrive, emails, handwritten notes, voice messages, from strangers, from survivors, from women who said, "Thank you, I thought I was the only one." And just like that, the house wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to all of us. A lighthouse for the silenced, a resting place for the unseen, and I never once regretted closing that final door, because it made room for one I never imagined would open. It started with a repost. A friend of a friend shared the book link online. Then someone else wrote a blog post about it. Then a therapist recommended it on a podcast about family trauma and boundaries. And before I knew it, my story, the one I once whispered only to my own reflection, was echoing across rooms I'd never stepped into. Libraries, living rooms, group therapy circles. The cover, a black and white image of a house perched on a cliff, wind bending its silhouette, began popping up on nightstands. The House That Remembered My Name wasn't just a title anymore. It was a mirror. And women everywhere were looking into it and saying, "There I am. I didn't expect the recognition, didn't plan for the attention." But it came, quiet at first, then steadily, like a tide you didn't realize was rising until your feet were already wet. An email arrived from a small literary festival in Portland. They wanted me to speak. Then came an invitation to sit on a panel in Santa Fe. Then another from a podcast. Then a magazine feature, one I almost declined until Marcus said, "Tell your story. Even if they never listened before, let them hear it now." I said yes. But I never wore designer, never walked in with publicists or stylists. I wore my softest sweater, the one I'd had since Berkeley. I wore the earrings Marcus bought me on our first Christmas together. And I walked in like a woman who had nothing left to prove, because I didn't. The interviews were always the same at first. How did you find the courage to walk away from your family? How did it feel to reclaim the home they stole? Did they ever try to come back into your life? I answered carefully, not cruelly, but truthfully. I never named names, but the story was clear, and the ending was always the same. I built a life they could no longer enter, not because I hated them, but because I finally loved myself more. That became a quote people started sharing, printed it on bookmarks, etched it into journal covers, tattooed it even. A woman once showed me a script curled across her rib cage. That stunned me more than the sales numbers, because it meant something had shifted. In the world, in women, in us. One fall afternoon, as the breeze turned cold and the sea outside the house sharpened to silver, I got a phone call. Not from a stranger, from my aunt, my father's sister. She lived in Vermont, and I hadn't heard from her since I was in high school. She always kept a polite distance from the family drama. But now, she'd read the book, and she wanted to say two things. First, I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you back then. And second, they talk about you now, Claire, all the time, your parents, even Eric. They don't know what to do with their shame. They say your name with both pride and regret. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel spite. I just exhaled, like something old had finally floated away. After we hung up, I stood on the back patio with a glass of wine in hand and watched the tide recede from the rocks, and I whispered something I hadn't said in a long time. I forgive you. Not for them, for me, because I couldn't carry their ghosts forever. They weren't mine to parent anymore. Wounded people wound others. Yes, but we're not obligated to bleed forever just because someone else refused to heal. I let it go, let them go. And the silence that followed, it didn't ache, it hummed, warm, clean, free. Months passed, the book tour ended, the buzz quieted, and I returned home, not to hide, but to rest, because I had done enough, spoken enough, given enough, and now it was time to live, not loudly, but deeply. I planted lemon trees out back, 2 more to join the first. I hosted dinners for women who had no one to celebrate their birthdays with. I taught a writing class on the weekends. I laughed more than I used to, loved more than I thought I could. And some mornings I woke up next to Marcus with the sun pouring in and thought, if they could see me now. But then again, they didn't need to, because I saw me, fully, finally. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. To become a woman they would talk about for the rest of their lives, but never again be able to touch, to be the story they tried to erase, and realize it was only just beginning. And if you're still standing in the hallway of someone else's story, waiting to be seen, waiting to be heard, let this be your sign. You don't have to wait anymore. You don't need their permission to start again. You can close the door, quietly, firmly, without apology, and open a new one they'll never get to enter. Because the moment you stop shrinking to fit their comfort, that's the moment your life truly begins. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, or used by the very people who should have protected you, then don't scroll away in silence. Leave a comment and tell us, what was the moment you knew you were done trying to please them? Like this video if you believe reclaiming your peace is the loudest power move. Subscribe for more stories where the quiet ones rise, and the ones who hurt them finally see what they lost. Because healing isn't revenge, but it sure feels like justice.